Drinking coffee will stunt your growth. Hi, and welcome to Microbial Myth 6, where we put microbial-related urban legends, ancient remedies, and superstitions to the test. To date, we've covered over 90 myths, so I'm really excited because today we're trying to hit that 100 microbial myth milestone. So we're glad to be here with you today. I'm Ashley Hagen. I am the host of Meet the Microbiologist, and I'm joined by Dr. Michael Schmidt, who is a professor in immunology and microbiology at the Medical University of South Carolina. You can find all of our previous myths on our YouTube channel. Just check us out and then hit subscribe when you search for microbial myths, and you'll be able to see them all. So let's get started. You know, we've probably all heard this, that coffee can stunt your growth, but there is no medical evidence that supports the idea that drinking coffee, even in children and humans, will stunt your growth. But it got me thinking, what about the microbiome? So Michael, I'm going to pitch this to you. Can drinking coffee either stunt or stimulate the growth of your gut microbiome?
Well, we all know that coffee is a stimulant, and coffee has a lot of beneficial properties to it because it has a number of essential oils. That's, after all, what we do when we add the boiling water. We extract the oils, and those oils actually feed the little creatures that are in our small and large intestine. And so consequently, finding the proper ratio, and depending upon what you have in your diet, it can be generally beneficial for human health if you drink coffee. But there's always a but with medicine. Everything is in moderation. Generally, it's less than 5 cups a day.
Oh, man. So I'm going to have to cut back. Is that what you're telling me?
Less than 5 cups. But you can moderate it with decaf because decaf is just as good.
For those microbes.
For those microbes, because
are still there.
The essential oils are still there, and the nitrogen is still there that's associated with the coffee grounds.
There you go. That makes sense. Very cool. Well, let's switch gears a little bit, and I'd like to ask, I've been enjoying time in my garden this year, and something that I recently heard is that putting baking soda on your plants can cure plant pathogens or plant diseases.
Well, we have a number of ringers here in the audience, and everyone knows what baking soda is. It does what, folks? It raises the pH. It makes the environment alkaline. So what that does is it inhibits the fungi from assaulting your plants, because in general, what our plants are suffering from is a fungal infestation, because fungi grow best at room temperatures. And so that's effectively what it does. So putting it on early before the fungus can get a foothold on your plant leaf is better for them.
So then that brings to mind, would it also help prevent fungal growth before it even starts? Or is it early, at the early signs of that fungal invasion, that you should treat it?
Yes and no. Again, everything in moderation. You don't want to overload the pH and raise it too high, because then you won't get the proper growth. You'll change the pH of the soil, because what you dust on the plant will go down into the soil, and it may make the soil too alkali to support the plant's growth. So again, everything in moderation. Just be an astute observer, what we were taught by our early mentors.
Very good. Okay, let's talk about an ancient remedy, and I'm going to call this one the pungent ungent, which claims that dung ointment is an effective way to treat wound infections.
No. Again, you don't know what's in the dung unless it's a qualified dung donor. You don't know if it's got bad things in it. And in fact, the fecal microbiome that you can actually buy as a pill comes from qualified donors, in which they work up the stool sample to make sure it doesn't have any bad actors in it.
Yeah, very important. Okay, so what about, I've heard snail slime or mucus can cure stomach ulcers.
Well, mucin is a wonderful thing, the thing that the snail slides on. And mucin has antimicrobial peptides in it. We all know about antimicrobial peptides. You know, those are associated with frogs. We've all heard the story about the frogs, as well as they have other bigger proteins that are antimicrobial. So what's growing in our stomachs? Well, we have Helicobacter, that's the causative agent for ulcers. And of course, those antimicrobial peptides can actually inhibit that little creature that's responsible for burning a hole in our stomach lining.
Very cool. So then I guess the question is, how do you get the mucin in contact with those stomach microbes? And we'll leave that maybe for another.
That's a pharmacology question.
Ancient,
that's beyond our expertise.
Yep, an ancient remedy that may stay. Okay, so here's a common adage. We've probably all heard this, and for those of you who are paying close attention, we've covered this myth before, so it's not going to count toward our 100, but we still need to cover it because it's too good to be forgotten. So if you go outside in the cold and don't cover your head, you'll catch a cold.
Again, we got a room full of ringers here.
Yep.
Viruses cause colds.
Absolutely.
And you know what happens, the reason your mother was right, you go outside and it's cold. And your nose begins to run. You come inside and you may not have washed your hands after playing outside in the mud and the dirt and the sleet and the snow. And then you rub your nose, you blow your nose, God forbid you pick your nose. And what happens? You've inoculated yourself. That's where that myth comes from.
There you go. Basic transmission of disease. Okay, so let's keep moving on. Another ancient remedy. How about lizard blood? I've heard lizard blood can cure diseases.
Oh, yeah. I actually took one of these drugs that was derived from the Gila monster. Wow. And it's an extendin. It was one of the very early GLP-1 agonists that we've been hearing so much in the news. You know, the Wegovy's, the Ozempics, and its trade name was Byetta. It was a nasty drug. It induced gastroparesis, and which meant your stomach didn't empty. You were always nauseated, and it suppressed your appetite. Huh. So it addressed the type 2 diabetic symptoms. And so we're, again, exploiting lizard blood, Gila monster venom blood, as well as dragon blood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so interesting because I had seen that some types of lizard blood has even been being used to treat Lyme disease, to kill bacteria that causes Lyme disease.
Again, they have these antimicrobial peptides in them, as well as real God-fearing proteins that are antimicrobial. We're only beginning to scratch the surface of antibiotics that are available in the natural world, which is, the number one reason we want to preserve the rainforest from our selfish perspective, as well as the rainforest is responsible for the microbiome that gives us the most important thing in the world, chocolate.
Yeah. Okay, so let's switch gears and talk about a little bit of animal science. In pets, if they have a dry nose, does that indicate disease or illness?
No, it just means your dog was sleeping on the bed and you woke it up. Typically, the way the dog's nose stays moist is they lick it. Yeah. Their tongues are big. Everybody's been kissed by their dog, and the dog is continuously licking its nose because it itches, it's dry. The same reason, God forbid, you should pick your nose, but that's effectively why there are pickers out there, is because their nose is dry.
Okay, what about dogs eating grass when they're sick?
Again, this is intestinal upset. The grass is a neutralizing material, and it just provides roughage to settle their stomachs. It may or may not provide some nutritional benefit depending upon what the dog has been eating.
Makes sense. How about another remedy? Eating ginger can help with periodontal disease.
Okay, what do we know about ginger, folks? It's anti-inflammatory. What's periodontal disease? Your gums are inflamed. Why? Because those evil, stinky bacteria are growing in your pockets. How many of you have been to the dentist and had that thing stuck up your gum line, and the dentist said, you have perio pockets, and they're greater than 5 millimeters in depth? That means you failed and you don't go home with a prize. You have to brush your teeth. You have to floss more. And what the ginger does is it's naturally anti-inflammatory, and it's the inflammation that's responsible for most of the bone reabsorption that's the big culprit in periodontal disease. I teach this to dental students, and that's how I've been brainwashed. Inflammation is bad. We all know that.
Yeah. Okay, how about beeswax to treat tinea cruris, or otherwise known as ringworm of the groin or jock itch?
Well, again, it's a fungus. And what is wax? It's naturally dehydrative. And when you add the honey, it just facilitates the movement of the wax and encourages the normal host flora, which are principally, in the case of the groin area, lactobacilli. And so that little bit of sugar will result in what? A drop in pH, because they're going to ferment it and make lactic acid. And that will inhibit the fungus. And that's, after all, our mission: inhibit those evil fungi. And in fact, women who develop a urinary tract infection secondary to antimicrobial use for UTI, often their pH of their vaginal vestibule goes up, and that's what results in the yeast infection that no woman wants to ever get.
So how about using bleach on your gardening tools? Will that help prevent plant pathogens and disease?
Well, that's a no-brainer. You disinfect your instruments. It's the same reason when you go to the dentist, they use sterile instruments. If you're working in your yard, you should use clean instruments. And bleach, sodium hypochlorite, is a natural disinfectant, but it's not straight bleach out of the bottle. Dilute it 1 to 10. And dilute it fresh because, again, the chlorine will effectively evaporate with time. So you dilute it 1 to 10. So 1 part bleach, 9 parts water, and voila, you will disinfect your tools and prevent the spread of those evil fungi that you've just turned over in your yard.
Nice. How about using washing your raw chicken before you cook it?
That's a no. That's a no. Again, what's on chicken? Well, the normal flora, or the microbiome of chickens, are Campylobacter, which is, the long-term diarrhea, and then our good friend Salmonella. And Salmonella you don't want, and if you wash it, you're more likely going to spread it amongst your kitchen utensils as well as your kitchen, and you're more likely to encounter those evil creatures because they're present in large number associated with the carcass. And most chickens have been effectively, and put your fingers in your ears if you don't want to hear this, they've been bleached. They've been dipped in a disinfecting solution, which is principally why the chickens grown in the United States aren't allowed to be imported into the United Kingdom, because we dip our chickens at the commercial processing plant to disinfect them before they come to our homes.
Interesting. So this is less of a myth, but it's related to this question. It's more of a flavor profile development. I've heard, patting the chicken dry is useful in developing the flavor. Any issues with that from a microbial perspective?
As long as you wash your hands and use a paper towel that you immediately throw in with your clean hand, so you don't contaminate your hands, and then wash your hands with soap and water for the prescribed period of time. And how long do we wash our hands? You sing happy birthday to yourself, and that's how long you wash your hands.
But at a reasonable pace.
You don't sing it like, all right, let's get over with this.
Yeah. Maybe a foot pedal on that garbage can would be helpful too.
That too.
There you go. Okay, how about hot water? Does hot water clean best?
Yes. It cleans best because it effectively lowers the surface tension, so you have more access to the molecules that you have in your soap, and the soap can encounter the microbe better. You have greater kinetic energy in the water, so you're facilitating the delivery of the disinfectant in the soap product to your hands as well as whatever you're washing.
Gotcha. What about lavender as a good disinfectant?
Lavender is an essential oil. And again, these essential oils we know have antimicrobial properties, either a peptide or a true protein.
Gotcha. Colloidal oatmeal is a good remedy for chicken pox.
What that will do is the oats, again, will facilitate the feeding of the normal flora of your skin. Again, there's a microbiome on our skin, and it will encourage their growth to effectively reduce the local inflammation caused from the formation of the pock. The virus is, of course, making a pock. It has no antiviral properties. Okay. If you want antiviral properties, you go to the drugstore and you pick up acyclovir, zamcyclovir, one of the virs that specifically will go after the thymidine kinase of the virus to prevent it from making more virus.
So it has prebiotic properties, essentially,
yes.
And antimicrobial or antibacterial?
No, it's not antibacterial. It effectively encourages the growth of the microbes on your skin.
Got it. Okay, how about zinc to reduce the severity of a common cold?
That's actually been scientifically proven. Mm-hmm. It does indeed work. You know, the transition elements are remarkable things. They can't make up their mind whether or not they want to be oxidized or reduced, and that actually facilitates their antimicrobial properties. And when I say microbial, I mean viruses as well as bacteria.
Nice.
And fungi.
All of them. So adding Epsom salts will grow better tomatoes.
That's magnesium sulfate. And why do you need magnesium? As a cofactor to make DNA. And what's a tomato? It's a seed. It's a bunch of seeds. And so you're facilitating an essential nutrient needed for reproduction.
Makes sense.
And also the sulfur helps to balance the pH of the soil, and you live a happy life.
How about, this is sort of related to what we talked about with jock itch, but how about honey and beeswax to treat diaper rash?
Same area.
Same area.
Same area.
Yep.
You know, diaper rash can be both bacterial as well as fungal, and it's more so an issue of chafing. You know, as the poor little kid is chronically wet, you're effectively encouraging the change in the environment that then results in the acceleration of a bad microbiome to facilitate its growth.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, when an animal eats grass, we already covered that, but what about when they eat poop? Is that a sign that they have some sort of nutritional insufficiency or disease?
Well, some animals do it naturally. The mice, of course, are coprophagic. They will eat other stool. And in fact, that's how we transfer the microbiome amongst mice. There are notobiotic mice that are born germ-free, and then we get the stool from one rat or one mouse, and we feed it to another, and they naturally eat it, and it's transferring the microbiome. So when dogs do it, again, it's generally a nutrient deficiency, and somehow it's stimulating them to eat the material.
Yeah. So if you're interested in learning more about the science behind eating poop, I actually recently recorded an interesting Meet the Microbiologist episode with Dr. Sally Bornbush. And for those of you who are listening today, you can visit Meet the Microbiologist on asm.org and tune into the episode. It was a really fascinating conversation. That covers my myths for today, and I want to leave time for questions for the group.
Yeah, let's take questions.
We're definitely over 100, so thank you all for participating in that. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
So that's the end of our myths today. Thank you for joining us for Microbial Myth 6.